Hello, everyone. We are back and we are at the end of 2021 and we've got some special astrology happening, some very high energy astrology happening here at the end of 2021. One is Venus retrograde, which we've already talked a little bit about. But the other one is eclipse season. So eclipse season has begun. We've been feeling the tensions, the energies, the intensity starting to rise here in the collective, maybe in your own life too. You've been feeling it. This particular eclipse season is especially potent and especially important to pay attention to because there are a couple different layers of interest happening at play. And I can't wait to dive into that with you. But first, I do want to make a rare pitch, which is something I usually don't do on these mini videos. But I am offering an eclipse season special right now. It's a mini reading. It's a 30-minute reading centered around the eclipses. And I always offer this during eclipse season. They are tons of fun. So I thought I would share it with you here at YouTube. And I am offering those for a limited time. So through the beginning of December, you can book your mini reading. They are focused around the eclipses. So if you want to talk about more than just the eclipses, I would suggest checking out my other offerings. I've got some longer readings that I also offer year round. So without further ado, we are talking eclipses. So the main one I want to focus on is the lunar eclipse, but this lunar eclipse is the first of a whole new series that we're going to be working with. So this eclipse season is really important and it's especially layered because we're wrapping up the story. We're wrapping up the old story of the previous eclipse cycle that we've been working with since June 5th of 2020. So if you remember, that was kind of a crazy time. And we'll talk a lot more on those topics for the next eclipse video that I do. Because that will be the one in which we are wrapping it up. So take a look, be on the lookout for the Sagittarius eclipse for December 3rd and 4th, 2021. We'll be summarizing those themes that we've been working with for the last 18 months. So, but just like as a little preview, we're going to start to see these double layers of themes coming in because we have the one story that's wrapping up. That eclipse should be just like a last little aha, a huge realization, an important realization, something that kind of ties that storyline together because the eclipses are facilitators of a new direction. The eclipses kind of I like to call them cosmic course correctors. They help us get on track. And so that's why it can feel intense or abrasive or harsh sometimes or stressful because the universe is literally like, no, we need you over here. Or you got to get with the program. You got to learn this. Your time is running out. So that's why the eclipses can feel really intense for people because even if you're not the one where the eclipses are like in your face, like the eclipses are in everyone else's face. So the world is kind of going a little bonkers during eclipse season. So we have the one storyline that's wrapping up, the Gemini-Sagittarius polarity, where the eclipses have been occurring for the last 18 months. We're going to see some sort of closure and some final rally to kind of wrap that up for us. Simultaneously, we're going to see the introduction of new themes. So we've got the Taurus-Scorpio polarity that is going to start to activate right now. So on November 19th, we're going to have our first eclipse in the series. It's going to be at 27 degrees, and I want to say, 14 minutes of Taurus. So we're going to get our first lunar eclipse in the Taurus-Scorpio polarity. And this one is a very big deal. Not just because it's the first of the series, which will introduce a lot of the major collective themes that we'll all be working with collectively, but also personally. But it's also conjunct Algol, which is a fixed star. You might have heard of Algol. Algol is the blinking demon's head. It is the Medusa star. It is, in fact, a binary star that eclipses itself every few days. I forget the exact number of days. I want to say it's 11 or something like that. So anyways, we have this blinking star that looks a little green. And so the ancients always associated this star and found that it corresponded with some pretty severe events. Algol in the mythology is related to Medusa. So thinking about the Medusa myth, we've talked about her a lot on here before because I love Medusa. I love the myth. I think it has so many rich layers to it. But we find this element of losing one's head. I host a monthly chart synthesis group, and one of my students and colleagues, very astute, her name is Lauren Ferns. She is studying psychotherapy right now. She's studying to become a therapist. And so she's been looking at all these therapist charts, like leading psychoanalysts in the field, like the people in the books, like the people like Carl Jung and Freud and all of those people. And she was saying that the Taurus placements are so strong in these individuals. And we were relating it to how this Taurus-Scorpio polarity has so much to do with healing. Scorpio being a lot of the collective energy, the collective trauma that we've all just gone through. And here's the thing with trauma is that you usually don't realize the magnitude of its impact until later, because very often when you're in it, you're in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you literally can't slow down to process it all. So it accumulates. And I really think that this Taurus-Scorpio polarity is going to activate that in a very big way. So when we think about this first eclipse with Algol, with people losing their heads, think about all the people in the healing professions who may or may not be hitting a breaking point right now, where people are short-staffed, people have just been like carrying extra heavy loads for people, especially in the therapist setting. And thinking about hospitals and how nurses have been overworked. I can personally attest for this because before I went full-time as an astrologer, I worked for a little bit at a hospital, and I know how overworked these nurses are right now, taking on more and more patients than they would otherwise normally. And they've been doing this for such an extended period that it makes me nervous with this Algol eclipse, being that lunar eclipses tend to be highly emotional periods where people may just reach a breaking point. So that's something to just be aware of, that there are people out there who haven't stopped, who haven't stayed home, and it's not slowing down. And so this might be just like an awareness for us, that this may be a time when people need extra support. And not just people in those professions either, all kinds of body workers and even just people in general. Algol is the eclipse where people can lose it a little bit. The other thing to keep in mind with Algol's mythology is that Medusa was a beautiful maiden, and she was so beautiful that Poseidon, and not making excuses by the way, but Poseidon couldn't contain himself, and he basically ravaged her. We could read it as like he violated her, but it depends on the story the version of the myth that you read. But anyways, this happened in Athena's temple, and Athena is a chaste maiden. She's like, none of that. The people who worship me, my entourage, they are chaste also. They will not participate in these acts. And so we could interpret it as Athena being a slut-shaming patriarchal sympathizer who then punishes Medusa and turns her into this hideous monster Gorgon. Or we could read it as, she didn't know what she was making a judgment about. Athena is a chaste maiden. When you think about the triple goddess in mythology and the archetypes of maiden, mother, crone, which could of course be applied beyond the gender binary, but the three phases of life, the three archetypal phases of life. And so Athena is there making a judgment of something to which she's not initiated. She doesn't understand. So regardless of how we interpret that portion of the myth, Medusa is then basically carrying the burden of someone else's act, someone else's malicious act, someone else's act that wasn't thought of and didn't think of the other person and how it affects the other person. So Medusa is then, think about that. Like, have you ever had something tragic or traumatic happen to you, and it takes away your innocence, and you're left to shoulder it? And how does that change you as a person? So I really empathize with Medusa in this myth and how she's left to deal with the poison that was injected into her, basically. So thinking about that in terms of processing trauma, in terms of processing grief, I think about that not just in the wake of a pandemic that's still occurring, but I also think about it in terms of ecological grief, which is a term that is being used a lot nowadays. So think about that a lot in terms of the South Node's entry into Scorpio. I think we're going to be processing a lot of grief. Grief from the last 2 years, grief from the economic devastation, grief from, I said economic, I meant environmental, but also economic. I think that the economic themes are going to be huge. Here, as we're entering eclipse season, as we're in it, as we're also entering into a Venus retrograde, where Venus is going to be stationing retrograde in a conjunction with Pluto, I really think this wealth gap that Pluto has been trying to talk about and stir up ever since it entered Capricorn in 2008, this also factors into the United States Pluto return, which is happening on February 20th of this next year. I think we're going to be talking about the wealth gap. And I think we're going to be talking about the billionaire tax and how do we manage our resources better? Because this eclipse is going to be kicking off a whole 18-month series of eclipses in the Taurus-Scorpio polarity. So while this one's in Taurus, there will be others that are in Scorpio. And Scorpio is resourceful. Scorpio is like, how can we make use of all this plastic that we're not using? How could we make use of these landfills? How could we make use of precious metals? And something else that really came up and we talked about a lot in my monthly chart synthesis group was the idea of shortages of materials and how that's already starting to happen. And on one hand, you see people saying, oh, I need that and it's in stock, so let's buy a ton of it. And then that's going to then create more shortages. So what do we do with this concept of shortages? I mean, do we actually need everything that we're consuming? We know that we here in the United States, we're capitalistic. Like, we buy and we consume way too much. That brings me to another point. We're coming out of an Earth cycle with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. We're going into air. So I really hope, it's my hope, I can't promise it, I can't predict it with 100% certainty, it's just my optimism, is that I hope that during the next 18 months, we do start to see more incentives for resourcefulness, because the problem is that the technology to change our entire infrastructure of how we create products and how we create energy is there, but there's no incentive. And there's billionaires out there who have the money to do it, but they don't. So what's the incentive? How can we make it more urgent that the Earth needs our help and needs us to get on board with more sustainable practices? So my hope is that we see some shifts in that direction over the next 18 months. Because look, in the next 18 months, we will see Pluto enter Aquarius. So before this eclipse series is over, Pluto will enter Aquarius, Saturn will enter Pisces. We will have had our Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Pisces next year. Hello, oceans. That's going to be in April of next year. So just a lot of huge changes. I mean, Pluto changing signs into Aquarius is huge. So this 18-month eclipse cycle, it's not a long time, but we're going to get a lot done during this time. We're going to have, the United States is going to have their Pluto return. So I really think that the subject of finances and how we pay for things, because look, inflation is becoming an issue. I think that that's going to continue to be an issue. So I will go back and do a longer video on this eclipse cycle, but I do think that we will start to see some of these themes start to introduce themselves during this next couple weeks. So pay attention to the financial themes, to the themes of burnout. And for that matter, one of the things that we can do to balance burnout and also to process our grief is to do things to get really present, to be really embodied. I really see a trend moving toward more open conversations about sensuality and sexuality. And I think that the North Node in Taurus is going to drive much more attention to that. I think, and Scorpio, a sign of intimacy and trust. I think we're going to start to see people slow down, kind of moving away from this busy, hectic, chaotic information, Gemini Sagittarius axis, and more into the body, slowing things down. Shortage of materials means that maybe, we're making things ourselves. We're DIY. How can we repurpose this? How can we reuse this? And also slow down and really just like get into the present moment, where our hands are at this moment, where our feet are planted, really getting present with our breath. So I really think that we'll start to see more movement toward that, as I've already started to see, but in a way that is healing, in a way that is counterbalancing, in a way that's a counterpose to grief, to a lot of the emotional heaviness that we've been experiencing collectively and as a planet. So I think that we'll start to see some themes come in there, because Taurus is a real sensual sign. I think we'll see innovations in beauty, especially when the North Node conjoins Uranus. We're going to start to see it change. The last time we had the eclipses in this axis was 8-9 years ago. That's when balayage took off. The thing everyone wants. Not everyone wants highlights anymore. People want balayage. So I think we'll see, and that's sustainable. Balayage uses so much less foil. Are you kidding me? So that is like a really huge leap forward for the environment in terms of the beauty industry. So I think we'll start to see some shifts. I think people are going to want to beautify. People are going to want to. It's like the practice of being present in the presence of beauty. So I think we're going to start to see that start to happen. But more specifically with this particular eclipse, it's conjunct Algol. And I think we're going to see people just kind of, I think we can expect to see people hit like a breaking point. And what do we do? What do we do about it? How do we counterbalance it? And I think that that's going to be a huge part of the conversation, is just continuing the theme of where we were at before the panorama, which was the North Node in Cancer, which was also about self-care. I think we learned so much. I think we learned how to do that while things have still been extremely chaotic. So how do we really deepen that connection with our physical present, where our feet are, in order to help us heal and mend and process a lot of the more complex issues that we're still working with, some of the more complex themes rather, because they're still going to be there. So some other themes that we can draw with this Algol eclipse is that it's going to be in a square to Jupiter. And Jupiter has a tendency to overdo and to keep piling more and more and more onto our plate. So that like sometimes with Jupiter, there's the tendency to overdo and to think like over ambitiously or being overly optimistic about something like, oh yeah, it'll work out. But Jupiter will let you know though, like, oh, you took on way too much. So there may be a tendency to take on too much with this energy. So those are some things to look out for. The other thing is the trine to Pluto. So again, bringing in that theme of resourcefulness, bringing in that intensity and bringing stuff out into the open. Those are some of the themes I think we can expect to be working with this first of many eclipses along the Taurus-Scorpio axis. So I'll have many more eclipse videos coming out for you. So just try to remember, practice your breath, find your footing, root into the earth, and know that no matter what, I think the eclipses, you'll hear stuff like, oh, the eclipses are malefic. I think the universe has us. I think the universe has us. They're here to support us. And the eclipses are just a way that we can just move things faster and clear faster and realign with things that are more specifically for us. So, thank you for listening. And that was your extended lunar eclipse astrology shot of the day. Thank you so much for tuning in with me today. For more astrology in your world, connect with me on all platforms at Astro Catherine. You can also visit me at my website where you can book your one-on-one astrological consultation where we cover all kinds of predictive and natal techniques. And I so look forward to working with you, and I will catch you next time.